And welcome back to another episode of the Total Sports Live podcast. This is Jovan Alfred. You already know who I'm joined by. My guys, Keaton Nichols and Harrison Brown. Talking fantasy football. Yes, again, we're back again for another week. Week 11, breaking down all the action, all the advice, all the news you need to know, including them anytime touchdown picks to get you paid on it for another NFL Sunday. We're not going to toot our horn on how well we did, but we'll get to that later in this show. However, before we do that, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Total Sports Live. Make sure you're following and checking us out on the website, totalsportslive.com. A lot of good stuff on the website. Eagles, fantasy football stuff, Phillies hot stove coming up soon with the Phillies and the hot stove. Some stuff there. Obviously, the Sixers are in action. XFL draft is here. A lot of stuff going on in sports world. So if you want to be connected and plugged in to everything you need to know what's going on, totalsportslive.com. And also make sure you're checking out the podcast here on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Anchor.fm. Anywhere you can get your podcast, just search Total Sports Live TSO podcast. Again, really appreciate everybody that takes a chance and tunes into the show and listens. And, if you do, leave us a rating and review. We really appreciate it as we try to bring you guys all you need to know, especially when it comes to fantasy football season. Then after we get out of that, we'll figure out what to do next with this crew when fantasy football season over. We'll make it happen one way or another. But, fellas, we're back again. Talking week 11. First off, how are you all doing? And secondly, we're in week 11, so we're getting closer and closer to fantasy football season, fantasy football playoffs, which means games are going to start meaning a little bit more. Them lineup decisions are going to mean a little bit more, and somebody, depending on your league, could be crowned a champion and and have a trophy at the end of this thing.
I'm trying to be that guy. I want that to be me. It's been a few years. It's been several years since I've won a fantasy football league. So I feel like I'm due this year. I've been laser focused this year in fantasy. Like I haven't made a bunch of trades, and I think that that's like my number one thing of why my teams are somewhat successful this year. That's what I'm going to go with, at least for now. But yeah, no, things are going well so far in fantasy this year. It's been a weird year in fantasy, but there's been a lot of value that's in a lot of places, which makes this show even more important to listen to because we can talk about, sort of squeezing some value out of some players in some places that you might not have expected. But when you really think about it, it makes perfect sense. So it's really a good year for fantasy managers this year to use your fantasy skill. And potentially, I guess later in the show, we'll talk about some trades too. So exciting stuff.
Definitely exciting stuff. How about you, Harrison?
Yeah, man, I couldn't have said it better. That's a perfect way to describe it. It's been a crazy year in fantasy, a lot of value from different places. So you got to go out and hit the waiver wire, hit the trade market, whatever you got to do to, find a way to get a good lineup each week. So looking forward to another great show.
Yeah. Like you said, finding different ways to put a line together. And I know fantasy football managers are going to be trying to put their lineup together, but you might have some issues specifically at the tight end position. As last week we saw both Dallas Goddard and Zach Ertz going down with significant injuries. Ertz, I think, is pretty much done for the year, it seems like. And Dallas Goddard's out for an extended period of time. I think he was placed on IR too, as well, if I'm not mistaken, by the Eagles. So that means right now he's out for at least 4 weeks. So this means that fantasy football managers are already in a bind heading into the fantasy football playoffs, where it's lurking at a position where we've talked about constantly on this show that is not really have a wide variety of talent. It's usually just the top 10 guys, and then it falls off consistently after that. And this year it's kind of been weird because Mark Andrews has been banged up. Kittle has not been the same Kittle that we've seen in recent years. Kyle Pitts is definitely not the Kyle Pitts that we saw last year. Darren Waller, he's on IR. I'm trying to think who else. Kelsey's been the only one that's actually been pretty solid. But everybody else, Goddard was taking that next step. Ertz was looking good in Arizona, but now both of those guys are down, fellas. So where and what should fantasy managers do at this point? Because anyway, like not even talking just from fantasy perspective, just from an NFL fan perspective, you don't want to see guys go down this late in the season because it's just like, damn, like towards the end of the season where we're almost done the regular season
Yeah, IR
and these
means you're
guys
done.
get hurt. Right.
Yeah.
These guys get hurt at the worst point of the season. But now we're looking at from a fantasy perspective. This is putting fantasy manager in a tough spot just because, like we said consistently over the last few weeks on doing the pod, it's not a lot of talent at tight end. And it's one of the true positions where you really have to stream every week if you do not have one of the top 10 guys in fantasy.
Yeah, a shallow position gets even shallower this week with two of those guys. By the way, this news would have been even more tragic for the Eagles, like if this headline would have ran like 3 years ago, right? You imagine that, right? Ertz and Goddard both done for the year, but still, I think you have to be smart. As I mentioned earlier, I think you've had to be really smart in fantasy this year to squeeze value out of guys that maybe you didn't expect. The tight end position is no different, and I think if you really want to maximize what you're getting out of the tight end position, you're not looking for trends like you are with the rest of the positions. A running back that's gotten 2 straight weeks of 100 yards, or a wide receiver that has 2 straight games with a touchdown or 3 straight games with a touchdown. I think with tight ends, you're looking more so for matchups. You're looking more so for whether or not a quarterback can rely on that tight end at any given time to be a safety valve. So that's what I think. You're looking for something a little bit different. If you're looking for a replacement, my suggestion would be Tyler Conklin. Go get him off the waiver wires. Only owned in something like 32 or 31% of leagues in ESPN right now. So go get yourself some Tyler Conklin. I said that last week about Cole Kmet, and it really worked out. So I'm hoping that phrase just continues to bring success. Go get yourself some Tyler Conklin on the tight end waiver wire this week. But, don't tremendously overthink it, as is the case in anywhere in fantasy. But I think at the tight end position, that's what you're looking for. Who has a good matchup for that week? Who has maybe a young quarterback or a quarterback that likes to throw short, 4 to 5 passes or receptions rather for a tight end can win you that week, depending on what the results are, of course. But, 4 to 5 passes, maybe, 5 to 6 targets a game could get you through. So you'll be fine. You don't have to get big names, and you don't have to look at big projections. Mostly focus on, I would say, matchups.
Definitely. And when you look at a guy like Tyler Conklin, like you said, he's only rostered right now at 26.4% of ESPN leagues. And he has, like we talk about matchups, right? Very favorable matchup, as we talked about before the show, against the New England Patriots, who justly facing this week. He had 6 receptions on 79 yards, 2 touchdowns, 10 targets, 19.9 fantasy points in week 8. So again, matchup specific guy, streaming option completely, just because that Jets offense, you don't know what you're going to get on a consistent basis. But Harrison, Conklin's not a bad option, especially if you're looking for a streamer. Anybody else that comes to mind for you that you think that people need to go say, I need to go get this guy because I might be in trouble if I don't pick him up and then somebody else just comes to scoop him out of nowhere? Because we know there are people out there like that will just go and scoop those guys up, not even use them, and they will hold them on their roster.
Hey, man, that might be me, technically. I think I'm known to do that. You know what I mean? I might keep 4 or 5 running backs, and I know dang well I'm not starting 2 or 3 of them,
Play defense.
So, yeah,
but at least you was the good Samaritan when you asked me about that. Like, hey, I got Tyler Algier on my roster.
I was like, what do I do with Tyler Algier, man?
Like, who can I trade him
for
to somebody that might need a running back? So that was good.
I try my best. I try, but no, looking at tight ends, I do like the Tyler Conklin pick a lot. I think, like you said, that Jets offense, you don't really, fully know. Looking back at Tyler Conklin, when Keaton mentioned him pre-show, just the role that he had with Joe Flacco really catches my eye. I mean, obviously they were throwing the ball a bunch then, but I think that there's real volume there. For some of my picks, I like Juwan Johnson, the tight end for the New Orleans Saints, a local guy down here in South Jersey, a Glassboro native. He's really carved out a role in that offense. And Jovan, one of the things that you said about just tight ends in general, you're looking for somebody that a quarterback can rely on, a quarterback can trust, and kind of uses a safety valve. I feel like Andy Dalton has started to use Juwan Johnson in some of those roles, just someone he can trust, get the ball to 4 or 5 times a game. And obviously, 3 out of the past 4 weeks, Juwan Johnson has went and scored a touchdown and had a really good fantasy game. It might not always be that 20-point high, scoring crazy outburst, but I think there's a solid 5 to 8 point floor at this point for Juwan Johnson. I think that he, is going to get 4 receptions most weeks. So I like that play there. Someone that we've just talked about on the pod all year, Isaiah Likely is another interesting play if you're looking for a tight end. But then someone that we haven't really talked about, another rookie who actually went higher than Likely in this past year's draft, is Trey McBride out in Arizona, the Colorado State tight end, second-round pick for the Cardinals this year. Zach Ertz, we talked about it, done for the year now. I think that similar to Johnson, there's going to be some volume there. I think that he'll be on the field for a lot of routes. I think that he's going to really kind of take over that Zach Ertz role. So I think it might not be this week, but I think that Trey McBride is someone to start to put your eye on. He was a talented tight end in college. He's a versatile guy. He can block. He can go out there and make some good catches. Kind of that power forward body frame, someone who can go up and get some balls, bigger guy, can out physical some smaller DBs. So I think Trey McBride is someone to maybe not pick up, but just start to put your eye on. I think that next week he could be a really targeted tight end on the waiver wire.
Trey McBride's a good one, especially because, like you said, he's not a guy that a lot of people are targeting right now. And if you look at him in ESPN leagues, he's only rostered in 2.6% of ESPN leagues. Like, we're talking like deep sleeper player right there that no one's talking about. It almost reminds me of another Arizona Cardinals player who we was talking about earlier this season, Greg Dortch, the deep sleeper. Somebody gets injured, somebody comes in, steps up, boom, and Trey McBride, like you said, could be that guy because you look at his stats so far this season, not a lot of production at all, right? It's not the greatest production. Even if you look at his matchups coming up, right, against the Niners, coming up in week 11, week 12 against the Chargers, abide, and have New England in week 14, you're thinking, okay, he might not do well in those first two matchups coming up, but that Patriots matchup, which has not been good against tight ends, right, this could be a spot where he could, thrive in. So I definitely love the Trey McBride pick. And even Tyler Conklin, right, going back to what Keaton said, about Conklin, a very good guy, a guy that a lot of people probably didn't realize played really well last year for the Vikings as their tight end. He didn't score 10 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns, but he was there. He was a safety valve option for Kirk Cousins in the offense, right, that had Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, KJ Osborne as the slot. He still found a way to be productive. So again, when we talk about tight ends, and I think you both have done a great job of, talking about this, it's about matchups, but it's also about volume. And you get the volume that usually will equal to some production. And I think managers, have to temper their expectations as well when you pick up these guys, right, fellas? In that, don't expect Kittle or Kelsey or Mark Andrews type numbers. I think you guys would agree that from a Conklin or from a Likely or even from a McBride, if you get 7-8 points from them on a weekly basis, that should be able to hold your lineup over.
Yeah, don't overthink it too much. I mean, again, if you don't have those top three guys, if you're not Hawkinson, if you're not Andrews, if you're not Kelsey, I described it to a friend last week as just it's kind of a dart throw at tight end, and so if every single week that's how it's going to be, just pay attention to the the deeper details of it, and don't overthink a name. For example, I have to start Kyle Pitts because of where. If the matchup makes sense, start the guy, but that matchup and how much a player makes sense at tight end is going to change. The value on that is going to change week to week. So, just be mindful of that,
Very good point. Very good point. And then for me, my selection for tight end, I'm going to go with the rookie Greg Dulcich. Okay. He didn't play well last week, but that Broncos offense didn't look good last week against the Titans, who actually have a pretty solid defense for all intents and purposes. That front seven's really solid. The back four could use some work, but Dulcich did not play well. I think he only had one catch last week, if I'm not mistaken. I'm looking up his stats right now as we're recording. I think he only had one catch, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see. He had one catch for 11 yards. Not great, but he did have 4 targets. So again, we talk about volume, right? He did see the volume. He actually almost had a big play because I remember watching. Almost had a big play in the game, but the ball was overthrown. He had beat the guy down the middle of the field and overthrown. So that's a big play there that's taken away from him. But outside of that game, you just look at his previous 3 games where we talked about against the Chargers, 2 catches for 44 yards and a touchdown. Against the Jets, 6 catches for 51 yards, 9 targets. Against Jacksonville, 4 catches for 87 yards, 5 targets. We're seeing a consistent target share in an offense that is really in trouble right now. If you're looking at the skill position, running back is really dreadful. Being a wide receiver, Cortland Sutton is still Cortland Sutton. Judy suffered an ankle injury, but it looks like he's going to be okay. But KJ Hamler, he's out for now a few weeks. Are you really going to depend on Jalen Virgil, who scored a touchdown? Are you going to really depend on Montrell Washington to score to be that wide receiver 3 for him? Or even Kendall Hinton, the former quarterback from Wake Forest, turned wide receiver who they threw into that game. Yeah.
Wide receiver turned quarterback turned wide receiver.
Wide receiver, yeah. that they threw into that game what was that, a couple years ago, which was just that was just bad. I felt bad for him.
I still have flashbacks of that game sometimes. I'll just wake up in the middle of the night, like, Taysom Hill,
Yeah, it was the Taysom Hill game. Meanwhile, Kendall Hinton was struggling.
I wanted him to play good in that game so bad. That would have been such a story if he had just went crazy and become like a starter.
So much cooler if he would have played better in that game.
So crazy.
Like 0.01% chance that would have, you run that simulation like 100 times, maybe one of those times Kendall Hinton has a good game. So we're still big fans, Kendall.
Yeah, we still
love you over here, man.
Anytime you're gonna come on the podcast, Kendall, we really we appreciate
Honestly,
it.
We would love to have you.
Love to have you on. But again, you're not dependent on those guys, right? You're going to depend on a guy like Dulcich, and he has a very favorable matchup this week against the Raiders. The Raiders defense has not been great against tight ends, and I think we saw even last week against the Colts. It wasn't Mo Alley Cox that was making plays against that defense. It wasn't Jelani Woods that was making plays against that defense. It was another rookie that made plays against that defense, and I think his name is Kylan Granson, who made plays against that defense. Had 4 catches on 4 targets for 57 yards. Only got you 5-6 fantasy points, but again, he was a viable streaming option. And when you see that happen, I say, you know what? Dulcich could be due for a bounce back in this spot. So I think Greg Dulcich is someone to watch out for. Like I said, Raiders defense not good against tight ends this season, giving up the 5th most points to tight ends. There's definitely a spot for them to exploit if you're looking for an option. And I think he's only rostered Dulcich in like 30% of leagues, 30 to 40% of leagues. So no, 47.4% of leagues. So he's getting up there, but still widely enough available where you can go pick him up off of waivers here. So we'll see how it goes with tight ends. Good luck for anybody that's in this situation with no Goddard or Zach Ertz, or if you just don't have a good tight end at all and you've been streaming all season, good luck heading into week 11 for you. So speaking of tight ends and speaking about, your lineup and what you should do and, good luck and all that stuff, we got to talk about the waiver wire, fellas. The waiver wire is still popping, even though it's week 11. It's still popping because we've got injuries galore across the board, and these guys are kind of affecting that. And we also just got some very favorable situations for guys that are somewhat their first or second best receiving option, depending on your team. So who do y'all like for the waiver wire this week? We got a lot of options that we wrote down before the show, but who are just some options off the waiver wire that people should be considering for week 11?
Yeah, so I'll say some of my guys. One guy that really catches my eye this week, he's someone that I talked about when we were talking about some rookies that could make plays real early in the year and then suffered an injury, has really fell off people's radar, is Treylon Burks out in Tennessee. Obviously, that Titans passing game hasn't really caught on at all this year, but I think part of that could be due to Treylon Burks' injury and the fact that just early in the year he was getting his footing, making his transition to the NFL, kind of to be expected. But they drafted him to replace A.J. Brown. I mean, they drafted him with the pick they got from the A.J. Brown trade, so they drafted him to be a big part of this offense, to have a big role. And I think he's going to get that coming off this injury. Came back last week, didn't come out crazy, make any ridiculous plays, but had 3 catches, kind of got his role back in the offense established. This week, Thursday night game against Green Bay, probably not cracking your lineup, but someone that I'm intrigued with. I think I talked about this last week with Pacheco. Like, if Treylon Burks is your last player on your bench, like, I'm cool with that. I have no problem with that at all. He has a lot of upside. He's young. We haven't seen him in this offense for more than, I believe, 4 games at this point. So it's very early in his time in this offense. So I like Treylon Burks. Someone that we keep bringing up, Isaiah Likely, is another guy that, just coming off this tight end segment. I think that he has a role no matter if Mark Andrews is healthy this week or not. But certainly if Mark Andrews isn't out there, I think that Isaiah Likely is definitely someone to pick up. I think he has a role. And here's someone that I didn't even put on our list, but I just kind of want to mention. Laviska Shenault out in Carolina has really just quietly, owned in 0.6% of leagues. There's just not much hype on him. This is a guy who a few years ago in Jacksonville was, fantasy relevant, starting in people's flex every week. I get it. It's the Panthers offense. You're kind of fading that offense. Last week, 3 catches on 4 targets, 17 yards, but the rushing, 2 rushes, 42 yards, a touchdown. Baker Mayfield's taken over at quarterback this week. I think that he'll look his way a little bit. Robbie Anderson's not there anymore. Just kind of a random one right there. Again, probably not picking him up yet. Definitely not starting him. Throw your eye on Laviska Shenault. Just keep an eye on him these next few weeks.
Laviska was one of those guys a few years ago that everybody loved coming out in the draft, coming out of Colorado with just his playmaking ability. It didn't happen for him in Jacksonville, but like we saw on Thursday Night Football, where anybody can score a touchdown on Thursday Night Football. The most randomest players score touchdowns on Thursday Night Football. He was the next in line to score a touchdown last week on a run that they called a run, even though it was a pass, it was a run.
It's a really random day to play football, honestly. Like, I
It is.
understand Thanksgiving, but like, come on. I mean, I love football. I wish we could have football every day, but not actually every day. Like, Thursday is a weird day, and then just like weird stuff happens on Thursday. So sometimes you just got to throw it away for a week.
You got to.
No,
you got to.
But sometimes it can be indicative of playmakers that are busting out too. I love the Treylon Burks thing. Because if he does become the thing, there's a few things to pay attention to there. Like, what's going to happen with Ryan Tannehill at quarterback? Because he looked terrible last week, and that maybe that's a part of the reason why Treylon Burks maybe only had 3 catches. And now he's just coming back, but I think that the I almost said the ceiling is the roof. Almost Michael Jordan my way through that. No, like I think that he has a really high potential in that offense as well. And like, who else is going to be the guy in the pass game down there as well? So you got that going for you. So I really like that Treylon Burks pick. I got a pair of Chiefs that I think will do quite well on your roster here. They're going to be quite available, especially for this week. Kadarius Toney coming off a really successful week last week, just his just his 3rd game, or what this would be his 3rd game with the Chiefs since the trade. So a dart throw at wide receiver whenever it comes to the Chiefs, minus Tyreek Hill, as we've seen. But they traded for him for a reason. I typically think that NFL teams, especially when it comes to adding a wide receiver to the crew, are saying that we need a specific element from our pass game. And we were talking about it pre-show. You guys mentioned it, that this move, in a sense, is kind of an indictment on Mecole Hardman, whose job it was to lose, to be the wide receiver 1 or 2, or to be the guy that's there. You go out and get a guy like Kadarius Toney because he's a playmaker. He's a physical wide receiver, and I think he can do a lot in this offense with the run game and in the pass. You combine that with Andy Reid's tendency to do Andy Reid things, tinker with the offense and do really creative things. I think it's a really good fit for Kadarius Toney, and he's still widely available as well in ESPN league. So go get yourself some Kadarius Toney, hopefully too. But also, while I'm here, if you look at what Isaiah Pacheco, is it Pacheco? I don't know, but
Pacheco.
Pacheco.
Yeah,
Well, you look
yeah.
at what Pacheco has done. So far it's been pretty impressive. He's had these bursts of skill that kind of come out within this offense, but the job is not quite his yet. In week 11, that could change. We could see a bit of a shift there, and if there is going to be a shift to happen, and it's going to happen at the hands of an offensive genius like Andy Reid, who's going to be smart enough to say the Chargers have been absolutely one of the worst, most atrocious teams this season at stopping the run. Absolutely anybody and everybody can run on them. I think we had combined 150 yards between the three of us last week on the Chargers. It's ridiculous. So I think in a game where you could see a shift of power, so to speak, from CEH to Pacheco, and in a game when you have a tremendous matchup against the Chargers, Pacheco could be a great not only stash pick, but if you're looking for a flyer on a flex play this week, and you've got a bunch of bye week fill-ins that you need to make up for, Pacheco's not a bad pickup and starter potentially for this week. Flex player rather for this week.
Good options, good options, good options, good breakdown by both of you guys. When we talk about the waiver wire, especially Kadarius Toney, because like you said, this is a guy that a lot of people was like, all right, he's not working out in New York. Do we really think he's going to work out in Kansas City? Is he really going to be the guy that we saw in Florida? Is he really hurt? And then it's like, no, just didn't want to be there anymore, and they moved him. And you see the skills that we saw him do at Florida. We saw it come out, we saw it come out and play in Kansas City last week against the Jaguars. But before I jump to my multiple list of waiver wire guys for this week, since we are live streaming this, even though we're recording this, we are live streaming on Twitch. We do have a question. Apparently, we do have a question coming in from the Twitch community from Jair's saying, can you touch on Christian Watson and if there's any confidence firing him back up over a burnable Titans secondary? So, fellas, Christian Watson had a tremendous game last week against the Cowboys, had a career high 107 receiving yards, also had three receiving touchdowns.
Oh, he counted them right there on the field.
He counted them. He didn't score a touchdown coming into that game, but he had three. And a very, like you said, Titans secondary has been known to give up touchdowns, the big plays. How do you guys feel about Christian Watson this week?
I think that he's going to be the top waiver wire added receiver, right? I think that coming off that explosive game, really seeing what the Packers drafted him for, what all the excitement in the pre-draft process was, I like the play. I think, kind of like Keaton mentioned with Pacheco being a flex play, I think if Christian Watson's in your flex this week, I mean, coming off that big game, I think there's certainly crazier, players to put in your flex. I think that Christian Watson, especially in a favorable matchup, primetime game, Thursday Night Football, I'm intrigued by it. I think that last week we saw a lot of the things that were, all of the traits that had people so excited about Christian Watson in the pre-draft process. We hadn't really seen it to that point, dealt with some injuries. We saw Romeo Doubs, another rookie who had a lot of fans in the pre-draft process, kind of get a lot of buzz, not necessarily overshadowing Watson, but certainly, garnering a lot more attention at some points in the fantasy world and just the, football world in general. So I'm intrigued to see what Christian Watson does with the rest of this season. I think that, his combination of athleticism and just kind of what he can do with the football in his hands, I'm certainly intrigued, and I think it's a quality flex play.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by Watson. That's probably about as far as I'd go, only because this season, and we've seen maybe in the past minus Devontae Adams, that the way that Rodgers runs this offense to the wide receivers is kind of a hot hand approach. And for a few weeks, it looked like Dobbs was going to be the man. And before that, we were saying, well, it looks like this job is Lazard's because, he's the man in this offense. And, they were having trouble finding and identifying who that guy was going to be before that within the season, too. So I love the talent and I love the big game last week. But, interested or intrigued, rather, is probably about as far as I'd go. Some tough matchups coming up. After Tennessee, you've got Philadelphia. Chicago's pass defense a little bit better than the run defense is. A bye week in week 14 as well, which is the last week of the season before fantasy playoffs start. Rams, Miami, Minnesota, that's okay in terms of matchups there. But I haven't seen a lot from this Packers offense until last week when we saw a huge game from Christian Watson. I think he's maybe due for one or two more of those. But I'd say I'm interested but not trustworthy necessarily of Christian Watson, only because of the way that this offense has gone and the way that they've thrown to their wide receivers this year.
Yeah, definitely agree with y'all. Both of y'all sentiments about Christian Watson. Like you said, very excellent game bomb last week. I mean, if you had him in your fantasy lineup last week due to, just certain teams being on a bye, I think the Bengals were on a bye last week. Ravens were on a bye last week. Jets were on a bye last week. Patriots on the bye. You needed somebody in a crunch. Christian Watson definitely came up huge for you in season long, even DFS. I mean, if you had him in DFS, you were sitting pretty in DFS. I mean, he probably won you your contest in DFS last week. So, I mean, Christian Watson, definitely going to see how he plays on Thursday night. Should be, I think, like Harrison said, definitely a top waiver wire option this week. I'm pretty sure people did go and see about him in their league if he was still available, just because there is no Romeo Dobbs. So someone has to be that over the top, take the top off the defense receiver, and he's showing that he could be that. So, hey, we'll see how it goes for Christian Watson Thursday night, and then see him, for the foreseeable future. Can he get into that rhythm with Aaron Rodgers? Because if he can, that's going to be very scary going into year 2 for him. I think year 2 is really, if he can build off this performance, I think year 2 is really where he takes off. Because we saw what he did in North Dakota State, and we saw what he did, just during the pre-draft process, and even in the combine. The dude can play, and he can do some things on the field. So appreciate the comment. Anybody that's, like I said, we're recording this, but anybody that's watching, listening on Twitch, drop us a comment. We'll definitely read it on air while we're recording and give you any advice that we could possibly drop back to you here on the Total Sports Live pod. And before we wrap up the waiver wire section, let me hit on my two guys as always here on the pod. For me, I'm going to talk about our favorite wide receiver here at Total Sports Live podcast, and that none other than Donovan Peoples-Jones, DPJ, continues to be one of the more consistent options in season long, but also in DFS. I'm pretty sure he's probably still undervalued in DFS at this point. Donovan Peoples-Jones, I think he had 4 receptions for about 80-something yards last week against the Dolphins. I think that's what his stats was, 4 for 80-something, 87, I think. I'm going off the top of my head, but I know he had at least 5 targets in that game. Again, consistency, really showing that he can be a quality wide receiver too in this league, playing next to Amari Cooper. You might not start him this week, though, just because there is some serious weather concerns right now where it comes to this game in Buffalo. They're talking about potentially like 6 feet of snow, like massive snowstorm coming to Buffalo. So might not be the greatest week to start DPJ. Could be more so Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt,
Big Nick Chubb.
James Cook, Devin Singletary, Naeem Hines, type of week in that game. But that being said, do not get rid of DPJ if he's on your roster. This is a guy who I think is going to come up very huge for you in the coming weeks, especially because, like we said, he's been consistent. And if you just look at who the Browns have coming up on their schedule after this week, I think, who do they have come up this week? After this week, they have Donovan Peoples-Jones. The Browns, they have Tampa Bay in week 12. Not a great matchup, but you can hit some things on that defense. Then week 13 against the Houston Texans, week 14 against Cincy, week 15 against the Ravens, another favorable matchup for him. Week 16 against New Orleans, another favorable matchup. Week 17 at Washington, favorable matchup. So there is favorable matchups for Donovan Peoples-Jones to contribute to your roster. And like we talked about, consistency. You look at last week, his best game of the season, 5 receptions. I say 80-something yards, 99 yards with 9 targets. He was really good. We talked about before the show, he's hit double digits. Ever since week 4, he's been hitting double digits consistently outside of week 5 against the Chargers. And he had 9 fantasy points. So he's giving you consistency in a team that's really predicated on the run and really has Amari Cooper, but he's really starting to show up. So Donovan Peoples-Jones is someone to watch out for. Pick up off the waiver wire. Like I said, only in 29.4% of ESPN leagues that he's on right now, rostered in. So there's your deep sleeper right there at wide receiver. And here's another deep sleeper. He's rostered in 9.9 leagues, but he's going to get a ton of catches and touches going forward and targets, and that's Van Jefferson, my favorite receiver going back to last year and the year before. I'm a big Van Jefferson fan. I got a couple rookie cards somewhere lurking around for some Van Jefferson. I might have to go re-up on eBay after the show's over on some more Van Jefferson rookie cards. But Van will likely get some more playing time with Cooper Kupp. Suffering another ankle injury was just, I mean, talk about a bad way to end that game. They're already losing. He gets the ankle and he gets rolled up one, towards the end of that game because John Wolford throws a wild pass that goes over his head. He tries to go up for it, gets his ankle rolled up on. Second time he suffered an ankle injury like the last 2-3 games. And it was just bad situation, bad time. And now Van Jefferson steps in last week, 3 catches for 3 targets, 27 yards, a touchdown, 11.7 fantasy points. Again, not the greatest stats, but again, an offense that is really looking and searching for someone to step up and be a playmaker. Van Jefferson looks like that's going to be the next guy coming up. It's between him and Allen Robinson right now. And I think we all know who we trust more in the situation between those two guys. For the Rams offense, and you can't trust the Rams running backs right now because you don't know if it's going to be Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson Jr., Ronnie Rivers, Kyron Williams. I mean, or even Malcolm Brown if they re-sign him. You just don't know. So the only consistent options right now that you have to believe in this Rams offense, I believe, is Van Jefferson and Tyler Higbee, who's starting to pick it up again after he had a couple slow starts. And yeah, you have a interesting matchup this week against New Orleans. Again, a very favorable matchup against that secondary that will give up big plays. It'll be interesting to see if we get Marshawn Lattimore back. He's been hurt the last few weeks. We'll see if he comes back. If not, I think Van could get a big play going in that passing game. Matthew Stafford looked like he'll be back. So yeah, we'll see what's happened. But those are my waiver wire options, fellas, for week 11.
Can't argue with that. Just real quick on the Van Jefferson thing, I think that Van's going to keep his same role in that offense, and that somebody else will fill in the Cooper Kupp quote unquote role. So just I think tempered expectations about what Van Jefferson will do. He's not going to be 10 catches, 150 yards, Cooper Kupp. But as
that'd be crazy if he was.
right. In an offense, where they're going to need to be able to stretch the field a little bit as well. I really like that Van Jefferson pick. Maybe even finding his way to the end zone 2 weeks in a row. So, strong advice. I'm just saying. I'm not saying. I'm just saying. Situation could be set up for that. Even if he only gets 5-6 targets in the game.
Hey, can't go wrong with that at all. This is the Total Sports Live podcast here on Anchor. Jovan joined by my guys Keaton and Harrison, breaking down week 11 of the fantasy football season. And fellas, we got to talk about the trade deadline. In a lot of leagues, we're getting closer and closer to the trade deadline. I think trade deadline in most leagues is the end of this month. I think it's in this month. So this is really where we're going to see the contenders, the pretenders. Will the pretenders sell off, or will they try to hold on for dear life? Depending on your league, there might be just a huge cluster of teams with 4 wins, 5 wins that still think they're competing, but they're not. So it's a little iffy right now in the in the standings right now in a lot of leagues, but we did list a couple players that people should go try to make a trade for on the deadline, and they're running backs. And I think one of them, Keaton mentioned before the show, and he could be a big help. And I think a lot of people aren't thinking about this guy just because of the team that he plays for.
Yeah, MC2. I just made up that name. I'm just trying it out, see how it feels, saying it out loud. Michael Carter, up there in New York. Hear me out, right? I know they made the trade for James Robinson, and that kind of gives a lot of potential managers rather potential anxiety about that situation. But Michael Carter has sort of fought off, if you will, the urge and the temptation to sort of be just a background guy. So moving forward, I think he's got some really juicy matchups coming up as well. And I think that as the season goes on, the temptation is going to be to, sort of lean towards one of these guys, when it comes to trying to move this offense down the field. And I think that that's going to be Michael Carter. Like, I think that they trust him in this offense. He's pretty decent in the pass game as well. The first couple of games when Joe Flacco was starting, he had a game, first 2 games of the year, 7 receptions, 5 receptions as well to go along with 10 carries and 7 carries. And that was when Breece Hall was still obviously very much so a thing. Throughout the season, they've continually given him consistent carries. So I really like the idea, if you're looking for a running back, a position that has been somewhat short this year, go after a guy like Michael Carter that's not going to cost you a ton if he's even on a roster right now, in your league. Well, it says about 84%, so he probably is on a roster, but maybe not valued as high as maybe what you need for a playoff push. Maybe you're
could be sitting on somebody's bench right now. That's not playing.
Bench. So I really like the matchups coming down the stretch. Injuries happen late in the season too, and Michael Carter could be like, if you have a guy that gets a start and he gets you a surprise spot start that gets you 17, 18, 19, 20 points, that could win you the week. It could help win you a playoff spot and maybe potentially the league as well. So Michael Carter, I think, out of all the guys that are going to cost you low leverage to be able to trade for at this point of the season that are still highly rostered, go get yourself some Michael Carter. I think it pays dividends coming up towards the end of the season.
Definitely pays dividends, especially because when we look at Michael Carter, he's a complete polar opposite of what you get from James Robinson, right? James Robinson is just he's lead back, but he's more the ground and pound, not the more pass catcher out of the backfield. Michael Carter gives you that added bonus of being a pass catcher out of the backfield, which helps boost his fantasy stock, which means he makes a very good RB2, or depending on some weeks, a flex option if you are stacked at running back and say, you know what, I might need a flex that I can depend on. And like we've talked about on the show many times, you can't go wrong at the flex spot with a running back in a lot of situations, because you're going to get the guaranteed touches and carries.
Yeah, exactly. I just really like, and also the talent. I think he's really good.
Only his second year. Only his second year.
He's really good. Yeah, and we have yet to see, what we can really get out of Michael Carter. And I think that ultimately, no shade to James Robinson. I know that's your guy, Joe, but I think that ultimately that Michael Carter is actually a better fit for this offense.
Yes.
I think that they really should lean and depend on him to be the main guy moving forward. Maybe that will happen this year, but if you look at the matchups and you look at the familiarity with the offense, and the Jets are trying to win this year, so I think you look at all that and you say that Michael Carter has a lot of value coming down the stretch.
He does. And Harrison, there's another running back on this list who many thought he was coming into the year, he's going to build off his rookie year out west. He was going to take off and really catapult himself, dealt with some injuries his rookie year, but he thought, all right, he got the injuries behind him. He was injured in training camp, but he's going to be good coming into the regular season, but suffers a knee injury, but he's come back now, and he's had a pretty good game. He had a pretty good first game back against the Chargers, but everybody has good games against the Chargers.
Come on.
But it's Elijah Mitchell coming in as a guy that we've talked about, I talked about, that you talked about, Keith talked about, we all talked about before the show, as a guy that could, be out there and available in a lot of leagues, because, as you said earlier, many people got rid of him once they saw Christian McCaffrey enter the picture.
Yeah, it feels like managers kind of tempered expectations for his return. Felt like he'd kind of be a change of pace back, maybe a guy who only was getting 5-6 touches, but he comes out in his return with an 18-carry game, 80-plus yards. Certainly encouraging. There's not a touchdown on that line, but if you throw a touchdown onto that 18-carry, 88 or 82-yard game, I think we're, as a fantasy community, having a lot different conversation about Elijah Mitchell this week. But he's certainly someone that I'd be interested in the trade realm. I actually have him in one of my leagues. I drafted him with the 40th pick, and he got injured week 1, didn't really have a big game, and has been out ever since. And they get Christian McCaffrey in that time. So you look at it, if you're a manager, you go out and pick him in that 35, 40, wherever you get him, in that range, you put a lot of assets into him and you haven't had him for the whole season, there's a chance you've moved on. There's a chance as a manager that you went out when they got Christian McCaffrey and got someone else to fill that running back 2 role, got someone else to fill that flex role. So, managers in your league could be looking to trade Elijah Mitchell. There still isn't a guaranteed workload for him each week. Like, we'll probably see weeks where Christian McCaffrey is a 25 touch guy, and maybe Elijah Mitchell is in that 15 to 12 touch range or 15 to 10 touch range. So there's definitely some value there in Elijah Mitchell. I think that's an interesting trade piece for sure. And I think the value could be there as well. I think if you're looking at a team that's struggling at quarterback and maybe you have 2 quarterbacks, maybe you drafted Trevor Lawrence and that's kind of worked out for you, and you package a Trevor Lawrence and maybe a receiver or depending on what the manager needs, I think that there's a realistic deal to get done for Elijah Mitchell in a lot of cases.
I like that. I definitely agree with you. Like you said, if you have a Trevor Lawrence, or even if you're in a situation where, say, you are good at QB1, but then you got Justin Fields off of off of the waiver wire, you can now use him as a weapon to get what you might need at the trade deadline for a team that's super needy at quarterback. Because there is a team that drafted Matthew Stafford that says, I need a quarterback right now. Or they drafted Derek Carr and they said, I need a quarterback right now. And you might hold that key with a Justin Fields to move to get an Elijah Mitchell or something else of need that you might want.
Definitely. If you drafted Aaron Rodgers right now, a quarterback, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot, Russell Wilson. There's a lot of situations where
don't get a start on Russell Wilson.
I hear you. I saw him on waivers in our league, and I was tempted. I
don't do it.
Broncos,
Don't do it.
Exactly. That Broncos offense is just. But no, I think there's a lot of ways to get an Elijah Mitchell deal done. I think that he's actually a guy that will probably be pretty much on the move in a lot of leagues. I think that he could be a guy who's on people's blocks and could help teams out if you're in a tough spot at running back. Because we know how it is, man, especially in a 12-team league. If you're playing with 12 managers who are active, like there's going to be a team that's hurting for running backs. It just, there's not that many
or
running
injuries
backs out there. Yes, exactly.
With Khalil Herbert going down this week.
It's a big, that's a big loss for the Bears and fantasy managers. That kind of is like the Elijah Mitchell injury in some ways. You lose him and you're out for an extended period of time. A young, talented running back that has a lot of upside and can do a lot of things for your lineup. So it's great to see Elijah Mitchell back. It's great to see him with an 18-carry game, just coming out the gate. Very encouraging to see because, like I said, people spent a lot of, a high draft value on him. He was not someone that was, a late-round pick or a waiver wire guy like he was last year. Elijah Mitchell had a lot of hype this year. McCaffrey wasn't there in the draft process. The thought was that he was going to take over with Raheem Mostert going to Miami. So, great to see him back, but I definitely think that he's someone that's going to be on some people's blocks.
Like it. So Elijah Mitchell, Michael Carter, the second, 2 running backs that you need to go pick up from the same draft class, by the way. Both are from the same draft class. So need to pick them up right now. Both teams are in the playoff hunt. So I think that also helps the value of these guys too. They're not playing on teams that are just we're like the Texans just playing off the string, guys are going to get touches. Like, no, these guys are actually playing on teams that are playing for something. So definitely going to get a lot of value going forward when it comes to trade deadline. So make sure you get them trades in, hit up them managers that might, be having 3 wins, 2 wins, 1 wins. See if you can try to finesse them to, get off of a player that you might need. There's always guys out there that are willing to trade. You just got to make it happen. You got to put that GM hat on.
And be smart. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, don't overplay your hand. Don't overplay your hand. And just be, like you said, be smart about it. So those are some running backs you need to go get ahead of the trade deadline. And last but not least, where we got to go to wrap up this podcast. It's a tradition like any other, or unlike any other. It is the Anytime Touchdown segment. If you were with us last week, we made you very profitable last week. It started on Thursday night when we told you Donta Foreman is going to score a touchdown against the Falcons. And he did. And then it continued on Sunday morning where we told you Julio Jones, and we specifically said he's plus 700 on DraftKings. We said this when we recorded the podcast, which was then uploaded and then dropped out to you guys on Thursday. Told you Julio is going to score a touchdown. And then what happened? Julio scores the first touchdown for the Buccaneers on a crosser. And then later in the afternoon, we had Devin Singletary score a touchdown against the Vikings. Not one, but two. Two touchdowns against the Vikings in a game that's probably one of the classic games for this season in a shootout that probably should have never been a shootout and should have been won by the Bills, but that's a whole different story for a whole nother day. Now, we didn't get you to Claypool, but that's okay. We didn't get you to Claypool. We didn't get you to DPJ, even though he did get red zone targets. Just didn't happen. However, we finished out the week strong. With the two Eagles finding the end zone. Devontae Smith scoring a touchdown on his birthday. He's now scored 3 touchdowns on his birthday in the last 2 years.
There you go.
And then Dallas Goedert found the end zone as well on the jump pass from Jalen Hurts. So if you do the math, out of 7 picks, we gave you 4. That's more than 50% winning percentage. We gave you winners here, and we try to give you winners.
Okay.
Here on the Total Sports Live podcast. But with all that being said, fellas,
cash this week.
Yes. Where are we going this week for the anytime touchdown plays before we can give people that burrito money?
Burrito
here on
money.
The podcast. Burrito money.
Way to coin that, Harrison. That's going to be a thing for the rest of the season.
I like it, right? I like it. I need to start listening. I bought like 3 burritos last week and didn't bet any money. I need to stop going to Chipotle and Pancheros.
No, you need to put some money down. Come on, you need.
I love burritos though. What do I do?
Yeah.
It's the healthy thing to do.
Yeah. They are
great. We all got to eat.
They are great, and they're very filling. Just like these anytime touchdowns are going to fill your pockets up this week with just pure cash.
There you go.
All right, let's get right into it. Like Jovan said, we've been rolling a little bit. I'm starting to get a little nervous. We've been rolling so much. I'm starting to wonder, like,
don't get nervous. Go with the gut.
And I'm also thinking to myself, I don't want to start putting any money on these because I feel like they might be working because I'm not.
Yes, you do.
I feel like the second I do that, I'm going to lose money. So
don't worry, I play vicariously through y'all. So y'all picks I do play. So
okay, good. All right. Well, apologies for the Claypool one. Let's steer clear of that. But let's head back to Pittsburgh in a way and look at a local guy, Tyler Boyd, coming back home this week. Obviously, Jamar Chase is out right now, so his role just in general, the volume, the looks that he's getting have increased. And I also just looked back at that week 1 game, 4 catches on 7 targets, 33 yards and a touchdown. That's with Jamar Chase there. Keaton mentioned this pre-show. It just feels like Tyler Boyd, usually has a good game versus the Steelers. A Pitt alum, a guy who played at Pitt back in the day, back on Heinz Field. There's always kind of that extra motivation when you're back on your college field, just back somewhere that you've played before. Like we said, no Jamar Chase. Joe Burrow has favored Tyler Boyd a lot just throughout his short career. It looks like they have a really good chemistry. So I like that play. And then just one that I was asking Jovan and Keaton, is it crazy to say a Justin Fields anytime rushing touchdown at this point, 4 weeks in a row? I mean, the odds are still probably going to be relatively in your favor. We're talking about a quarterback rushing anytime touchdown. I don't hate it at all. I feel pretty comfortable saying that Justin Fields is going to make it 5 weeks in a row. I mean, just the surgence that we've seen from him, this Bears offense, the revitalization of their play calling, the things that they're doing, trying to get him more carries, throwing the ball on the run more play action. I just think that there's an emphasis on utilizing Justin Fields and making him the highlight and the vocal point of this offense. And I like him as an anytime touchdown play this week. I think that he's going to make it 5 in a row on the ground. So those are my 2. I like Tyler Boyd to catch one back in Pittsburgh, and I like Justin Fields to make it 5 in a row on the ground.
Tyler Boyd's a good one, especially if you want to talk about the Steelers secondary, which has given up a league high 13 receiving touchdowns to wide receivers this season. And if you're talking about the Falcons, they have not done very well in the rushing department this season. They obviously got mauled last week on the ground by Dante Foreman, and they have given up 13 rushing touchdowns this season, which is 4th highest in the league. So just a little statistical breakdown, a little backup to these anytime touchdown picks. So we got Fields and we got Tyler Boyd. What about you, Keaton? Who are some of your guys that you're looking out
Yeah.
for anytime touchdowns?
This week I got a Thielen. Adams due. He is. We think that Justin Jefferson is going to play this week. Pretty sure. But you never know what's going to happen. That could affect the odds. But at this point, I think that Thielen is kind of due. Going against a secondary that doesn't necessarily scare you outside of it does scare you, I guess the Dallas defense does, but I'm not necessarily worried about what's going to happen opposite of where Diggs is here, and that's where I think there is money to be had here with Adam Thielen. He's due for a touchdown, hasn't scored in maybe I think 5 weeks. In the last 5 weeks, I had a stat line up here just a second ago. But point being, Adam Thielen I think is kind of due. He hasn't gone away yet in this offense in the way that a lot of people thought he would. With Justin Jefferson just soaking up so much attention on the other side, but he's still consistent. He's not, super fast, never been that guy either, but somebody that can certainly score inside the red zone. This Vikings team is hot right now. They're going to continue to try and score, so give me some Adam Thielen this week as an anytime touchdown. And also in that same game that he talked about, I love the Tyler Boyd pick. You can put your paycheck on Tyler Boyd scoring in Pittsburgh against the Steelers. It almost happens every time, but opposite of that, I think that Najee Harris on Pittsburgh's side of things has been really challenged by Jaylen Warren playing well and Mike Tomlin kind of leaning towards the idea that, hey man, if this guy's playing well, we're gonna start playing him a little bit more. I think that lit a fire under Najee, and also at home, huge divisional game against the Bengals. That they need to win. The Steelers need to win this game, and when it comes to games that the Steelers have needed to win against the Bengals, against the Browns, at least the Ravens kind of a 50-50 split there, but within the division, they play hard against the teams that they're most familiar with in the spots that they need to play hard in. They're going to win this game by any means, and it's probably not going to be with Pickett throwing 35, 40 times a game. So if you think again about how the Steelers are going to win a game that they absolutely have to win, it's going to mean that Najee Harris is going to have to be an active member of what happens inside the red zone. So I think Najee Harris finds his way in. That's my second pick.
I like it. I like that. Najee Harris, like you said, he had a really good game last week against the Saints. 99 yards on 20 carries. One of his better games that we saw this season. Maybe that gets him going against the Bengals. And then you mentioned Adam Thielen. Thielen has scored 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games against the Dallas Cowboys. So,
come on.
Again, more statistical backup for these anytime touchdown picks. And then for me, I'm going to go to Thursday Night Football, since why not, right? We went Dante Foreman last week. Why not go to Thursday Night Football this week? I'm going with Allen Lazard. Allen Lazard, anytime touchdown, which is right now on DraftKings at plus 185 against Titans. Everybody's going to be talking about Christian Watson. I know, because the rookie had a very good game. And the running game for the Packers is good, but that Titans run defense is pretty stout and pretty solid. However, this Titans secondary can give up touchdowns. They can give up big plays in the passing game. Allen Lazard is one of Aaron Rodgers' more consistent receiving threats on the team at plus 180, at plus 185.
Wow. It's incredible.
I have to take that shot on that just because I don't think he should be plus 185 just with his role in this offense. So I'm going Allen Lazard plus 185 right now on DraftKings. I do not know what it is at other books while we are recording, but remember, as always, like we say with these anytime touchdown props, make sure you just go ahead and line shop. Go ahead and line shop and see what's out there at multiple books. Try to get the best odds in dollars available, to you before you sign in and drop those bets down in your bank account or wherever you use to make those picks. So we got Allen Lazard for me, and last but not least, we got Cordero Patterson. Patterson had a very quiet last game against the Panthers, but that was probably more so short week for him, just coming back off an injury. Wasn't utilized much. Also, just terrible conditions on the field with the rain. Think he bounces back against a Bears defense that is susceptible to the run, that will give up the run and give it up. And they have given up 17 rushing touchdowns this season. Yes, 17 rushing touchdowns the Bears have given up this week. We saw last week
Yikes.
DeAndre Swift found the end zone after
Somehow.
he found the end zone. So I think Cordero Patterson will somehow found the end zone this week against the Bears. So I like Cordero Patterson. Alan Lazard, Keaton likes Adam Thielen, Najee Harris, Harrison with Tyler Boyd, Justin Fields. Those aren't an anytime touchdown picks. Remember, play responsibly as always. Play responsibly as always. And have some fun. That's the biggest thing about it. Have some fun with it. Don't go crazy. Don't go parlay these things. Play it straight. Have some fun. Only bet with how much you are comfortable with losing, like me, the $5 king himself. Bet responsibly, and you'll be a-okay. So I think that's it, fellas. I think that's the last that we have here on the pod. Anything else before we go?
Go Steelers.
I like it, man. Go Birds.
That's right.
Right.
I would expect nothing less from you two.
Nah, another great show with you guys, man. I had a lot of fun. Just quickly, man. If you're a college football fan, Penn and Princeton this weekend, real good Ivy League battle for the Ivy League championship. Check out Coffee Jones on the call on the radio with our guy Pat McCarthy. Coming down to it. So some real good college football down here in Jersey this weekend.
That's gonna be a good one. That's really gonna be a good one. So like Harrison said, if you're in the area in Princeton,
right, come on
check
out.
that out.
Right.
That's gonna be one hell of a game because both teams have played really good this season, and Princeton had a pro prospect on offense at wide receiver who's really getting a lot of attention from the scouts. So
we're gonna be talking about him next year on this podcast. Andre Yosevich. Yes, we will be talking about him as a rookie sleeper and someone to look out for. And he's going to come out with a 25-point game, and everybody's going to be like, "What? Who the heck is this guy?" So yeah, he's really good.
You heard it here first on the Total Sports Live or the Total Sports Live podcast. But yeah, that's going to wrap up the pod. Really, again, appreciate everyone that tuned in. As always, like I said, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Total Sports Live. Make sure you're checking out the website totalsportslive.com. Waiver wire report should be up very soon. Gotta wait until WordPress finishes up their maintenance. Once they do, then I can go back in and do what I need to do. But yeah, waiver wire report from Seth will be back up if he gives you the gems that you need to know before you get your lineup set in fantasy this week. As always, again, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Total Sports Live. Make sure you're checking out the podcast on the multiple streaming platforms: Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can check it out there. Yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll be back next week, maybe earlier than next week, as we have the XFL draft wrapping up. So me and Harris might be diving into some XFL stuff sometime this week, early next week, maybe before the holidays, as it's Thanksgiving. So actually, there might not be a podcast next week with the holiday coming up. So
I hadn't even thought of that.
So you might not hear from us next week, but that's okay. If you don't, then remember, you can tweet at us if you have any fantasy suggestions. If you need some help with advice, again, follow us on Twitter at Total Sports Live, and then you see the banner below. If you're watching this on YouTube, at Jovan10, at Harry Brown-Russo, at Keaton D. Nichols, you can go right there. And always, we will have our graphic for our anytime touchdowns too for next week as well. So we will have those picks. They will still be there for you. So for me, Harrison, and Keaton, everyone have a good one, and we will talk to you all very soon.